The snow had been falling for 3 days when Nola reached the cabin. She could barely see the structure through the white curtain, but the smoke rising from the chimney told her someone was alive inside. Her arms ached from carrying the bundle pressed against her chest, wrapped in every scrap of cloth she owned. The baby had stopped crying an hour ago, which terrified her more than the crying ever had. She stumbled the last 20 yards and collapsed against the door. Her knuckles were too numb to knock properly, so she kicked at the wood with what remained of her strength. The door opened so suddenly she nearly fell inside. The man who stood there was enormous. That was her first thought. Broad shoulders filled the doorframe, and his shadow swallowed the threshold. A thick beard covered most of his face, dark hair fell past his collar, and his eyes were the pale gray of winter sky. He stared at her like she was an apparition. She tried to speak, but her jaw would not cooperate. The cold had its teeth in her. She held out the bundle instead, pulling back just enough fabric so he could see the tiny face inside. His expression did not change. He looked at the baby, then at her, then past her shoulder at the empty white expanse behind. When he spoke, his voice was rough from disuse. "Get inside." It was not kindness, it was practicality. She would die on his doorstep otherwise, and he would have to bury her come spring. Nola stepped over the threshold and the warmth hit her like a fist. Her legs gave out. He caught her before she hit the floor, one massive hand steadying her elbow while the other reached for the baby. She clutched the bundle tighter on instinct. "I need to check the child," he said. She let him take the baby then, because the words made sense even if nothing else did. He carried the infant to the fire and unwrapped the layers with surprising gentleness. The baby was a girl, 4 months old, with a cap of dark hair and skin far too pale. She did not cry when the cold air touched her. She barely moved. The man laid her on a fur near the hearth and examined her with careful hands. He felt her chest, listened to her breathing, touched her forehead. Then he stood and moved to a shelf lined with jars and tins. "What is her name?" he asked without turning around. "Ivy." Nola's voice cracked. "Her name is Ivy." He mixed something in a wooden bowl. Water, honey, a pinch of dried herbs she could not identify. He soaked a strip of clean cloth in the mixture and brought it back to the baby, squeezing drops onto her lips. Ivy's mouth moved weakly. She swallowed. "She needs warmth and food," he said. "Do you have milk?" Nola shook her head. "I've been trying to keep her alive on goat's milk and water. The goat died 2 weeks ago." He nodded once, as if this confirmed something he already suspected. He went to a corner of the cabin and returned with a tin cup and a small pot. He poured something thick and white into the pot and set it over the fire to warm. "Sheep's milk," he said. "I have 3 ewes in the lean-to. The child will need to eat every few hours." He spoke in short, declarative sentences, like a man who had forgotten how to converse. Nola watched him work and tried to understand where she was and who this man might be. The cabin was small, but well built. 1 room, a stone fireplace, a narrow bed in the corner, shelves lined with supplies. Everything was orderly, clean. The mark of a man who lived alone and had made peace with it. When the milk was warm, he soaked the cloth again and fed the baby, drop by drop. Ivy took it slowly, her small throat working. After a dozen drops, her eyes opened. They were blue, like her father's had been. The man saw it too. His hand stilled for just a moment, the cloth dripping milk onto the fur. Then he continued feeding her as if nothing had happened. Nola tried to stand and the room tilted. He was beside her in an instant, one hand on her shoulder, pushing her back down. "You need to eat," he said. "Then you need to sleep. We will talk after." He brought her a bowl of stew, thick with meat and root vegetables. She ate without tasting it, her body taking over where her mind had gone numb. When the bowl was empty, he took it from her hands and pointed to the bed. "Sleep there. I will watch the child." "I can't take your bed," Nola said. "You just did." There was no arguing with him. She crawled onto the narrow mattress and pulled the wool blanket over herself. The last thing she saw before sleep took her was the man sitting by the fire, the baby cradled in one massive arm, his eyes fixed on the tiny face as if he were trying to solve a problem with no answer. When she woke, pale light was filtering through the single window. The storm had passed. The fire still burned, and the man still sat beside it, though he had moved to a chair. Ivy was asleep in a nest of furs at his feet, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. He noticed Nola stirring and stood. He brought her water and a piece of flatbread, waiting while she drank and ate. Then he sat down across from her, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. "Tell me," he said. So she did. She told him about Thatcher, his younger brother, who had gone east 3 years ago looking for work. How Thatcher had found a job on a railroad crew and met a woman in a town called Seneca Falls. How that woman was Nola, a widow with nothing to her name but a good sewing hand and a small room above a milliner's shop. How Thatcher had courted her with a gentleness she had not known men possessed. How they had married in the spring, and how he had promised her a future. She told him about the pregnancy, and how Thatcher had been so proud he could barely stand it. How he had worked double shifts to save money for the baby. How he had died 4 weeks before Ivy was born, crushed between 2 rail cars during a coupling accident that should never have happened. She told him about the months after, trying to survive on the small sum the railroad paid her, trying to nurse a baby when her own body was failing from hunger and grief. How the landlord had evicted her when the money ran out. How she had sold everything she owned and used the last of it to buy Passage West, because Thatcher had told her about his brother in the mountains, a man named Arden who lived alone and asked nothing of the world. "He said you were the strongest man he ever knew," Nola said quietly. "He said if anything ever happened to him, I should find you. He said you would help." Arden was silent for a long time. His face was unreadable behind the beard, but his hands had tightened into fists. "Thatcher is dead," he said finally. "Yes." "You came all this way with a baby in winter." "I had nowhere else to go." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered expanse. His shoulders were rigid. "Thatcher left 5 years ago," he said. "We fought before he went. I told him he was a fool to chase work in the East. I told him the mountains were enough. He said I was afraid of the world. We did not part well." Nola said nothing. There was nothing to say. "He wrote to me once," Arden continued. 2 years ago. He said he had married. He said he was happy. He asked me to forgive him for the things he said. I never answered the letter." He turned to face her then, and his eyes were raw with something that might have been grief, or might have been rage, or might have been both. "I never answered," he said again. "He forgave you anyway," Nola said. "He told me you were the better man. He said he understood why you stayed." Arden looked at the baby sleeping by the fire. His jaw worked under the beard. "She has his eyes," he said. "Yes." He crossed the room and knelt beside Ivy, watching her sleep. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You can stay until spring. The passes will not be clear before April. After that, I will take you wherever you want to go." Nola felt something crack open in her chest. Relief, gratitude, something too large to name. "Thank you," she said. He did not acknowledge it. He simply stood and went to the door, pulling on a heavy coat. "I need to check the animals and cut more wood. There is food in the larder. Feed the baby when she wakes." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a solid thud. Nola sat in the silence and looked around the cabin. This was survival, not sanctuary. Arden had offered her shelter because she was his brother's widow, and the child was his blood. But he had not offered warmth. He had not offered welcome. He was a man who had built a life without people, and she and Ivy were an intrusion he would tolerate until the snow melted. She told herself it was enough. It had to be. The days fell into a rhythm. Arden woke before dawn and went outside to tend the sheep, chop wood, check his traps. He came back when the light was full, ate a silent breakfast, then disappeared again until dusk. He spoke only when necessary, his words clipped and functional. He showed Nola where things were kept, how to bank the fire, how to prepare the sheep's milk for Ivy. He did not ask about her life before, and she did not offer. But he watched the baby. Nola noticed it in the evenings, when he thought she was not paying attention. He would sit by the fire with his hands busy mending a harness or sharpening a blade, but his eyes would drift to Ivy. The baby was growing stronger, her cheeks filling out, her cries growing louder and more insistent. She had begun to notice the world around her, her gaze following movement and light. One night, Ivy reached for the firelight and made a sound that was almost a laugh. Arden went completely still, his knife frozen mid-stroke against the leather. He stared at the baby with an expression Nola could not read. Then he set down his work and stood, walking to the door. "I need to check the traps," he said, though it was full dark outside and no one checked traps at night. He did not come back for 2 hours. When he did, his face was red from cold and his eyes were careful and blank. Nola began to understand that Arden was not cold. He was afraid of what the baby meant, afraid of the grief he had not let himself feel when Thatcher died, afraid of needing something again after 5 years of needing nothing. She did not push. She simply existed in the space he allowed, caring for Ivy, keeping the cabin clean, cooking the meals he provided. She learned the shape of his silence, the way he moved through the small space like a man trying not to disturb the air. She learned that he took his coffee black and bitter, that he did not eat until she and the baby had eaten first, that he never slept more than a few hours at a time. She also learned that he was competent in ways that startled her. He could treat a fever, set a bone, stitch a wound. He knew which plants were medicine and which were poison. He could predict the weather by the way the wind moved through the pines. He had survived 5 winters alone on this mountain, and the mountain had not broken him. One morning, 3 weeks after her arrival, Nola woke to find him sitting beside Ivy's makeshift cradle, his large hand resting gently on the baby's chest. He was not doing anything, just sitting there, feeling her breathe. When he noticed Nola watching, he pulled his hand back as if burned. "Shh, she was coughing," he said. "I wanted to make sure her lungs were clear." "Thank you," Nola said. He left the cabin without another word. That afternoon, she found him in the lean-to with the sheep, building something out of wood. When she asked what it was, he did not look up. "A proper cradle," he said. "The nest of furs is not safe. She will roll soon." He worked on it for 3 days, his hands precise and patient. When it was finished, he lined it with soft wool and set it near the fire. He placed Ivy inside without ceremony, adjusted the blanket around her, then went back to his work as if he had done nothing remarkable. But Nola saw the way his eyes returned to the cradle throughout the evening. She saw the way his shoulders loosened when Ivy settled into sleep without fussing. Winter deepened. The snow piled high against the cabin walls, and the world beyond the clearing disappeared into white silence. Nola had never experienced cold like this, the kind that made every breath sharp and every surface dangerous. But inside the cabin, the fire burned steady, and the walls held firm. She and Arden developed a language of small gestures. He left firewood stacked by the door before she needed to ask. She mended the tear in his coat before he noticed it was torn. He brought her a handful of winter berries he had found in a sheltered grove. She made him a new pair of mittens from wool she carded and spun while Ivy napped. They did not speak of Thatcher. They did not speak of the future. They lived in the narrow present, one day folding into the next. But something was shifting. Nola felt it in the way Arden had begun to linger in the cabin after meals, sitting by the fire instead of retreating to his work. She felt it in the way he had started to hum sometimes, a low, tuneless sound that seemed to surprise him when he noticed he was doing it. She felt it in the way he looked at her now, not through her, but at her, as if he were slowly remembering that she was a person and not just a problem to be solved. One evening, a wolf howled somewhere on the mountain. Ivy startled awake and began to cry. Nola moved to comfort her, but Arden was faster. He picked up the baby and held her against his chest, one hand supporting her head, the other rubbing slow circles on her back. He walked with her, swaying slightly, murmuring something too low for Nola to hear. Ivy quieted almost immediately. She grabbed a fistful of his beard and held on, her eyes wide and curious. Arden looked down at her, and for the first time since Nola had arrived, he smiled. It was a small thing, barely a shift in his expression, but it changed his entire face. "She is strong," he said, "like her father." "Yes," Nola said. "She is." He handed the baby back carefully, his fingers brushing Nola's as he did. The touch lasted only a second, but it left a warmth behind. That night, after Ivy was asleep and the fire had burned down to embers, Arden spoke into the darkness. "I was married once," he said. Nola went still. She had not expected this. Her name was Ruth Ann. She died in childbirth. The baby died too. A son. I buried them both on the south slope where the sun hits first in spring. His voice was steady, but Nola could hear the weight beneath it. "That was 6 years ago," he continued. "Thatcher was here when it happened. He helped me dig the graves. He stayed for 2 months after trying to pull me back. But I did not want to be pulled back. I wanted to be left alone. So I drove him away. I said things I should not have said. And when he left, I told myself it was better. Easier." He paused. The wind rattled the shutters. "I told myself I would never need anyone again, and I did not. For 5 years, I did not need a single person." He turned his head to look at her across the dim room. "Then you arrived," he said. Nola did not know what to say. She could feel her heart beating too fast. "I do not know what to do with you," Arden said quietly. "I do not know what to do with her. I do not know what to do with any of this." "You do not have to do anything," Nola said. "We will leave in the spring like you said. You have been kind to us. That is enough." "Is it?" he asked. She did not answer, because she did not know. The next morning, he was gone before she woke. She found a note on the table, written in careful block letters. "Checking the trap line. Back tomorrow night." He had never left her alone before. She tried not to read meaning into it, but the cabin felt enormous without him. Every creak of the wood, every gust of wind made her aware of how isolated they were. She kept the fire high and the door barred, and she sang to Ivy to fill the silence. Arden returned the following evening with 2 rabbits and a haunch of venison. He also brought something wrapped in oiled cloth. He set it on the table in front of her without explanation. Inside was a book. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed, but the title was still legible. Poems of the American Frontier. "Thatcher left it here," Arden said. "He used to read to Ruth Ann. She liked the sound of his voice. I thought you might want it." Nola touched the cover gently. "Thank you. Read to the baby," he said. "She should hear words. More than just my silence." So she did. That night, and every night after, she read aloud while Arden worked and Ivy drowsed by the fire. She read about rivers and plains and mountains, about love and loss and the wild beauty of the untamed land. Arden never commented, but she noticed he had stopped working. He just sat and listened, his eyes on the fire, his hands still. One night she read a poem about a man who had lost everything and found it again in the last place he thought to look. When she finished, Arden stood and walked to the window. He stood there for a long time, his back to her. "I do not want you to leave in the spring," he said. Nola's breath caught. "What?" "I do not want you to leave." He turned to face her. "I want you to stay. Both of you. Here." "Arden. I know I have no right to ask. I know I have given you nothing but a cold cabin and colder company, but I am asking anyway." He crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair, his eyes level with hers. "I have been alone for 5 years," he said. "I thought that was what I wanted. I thought I had buried the part of me that needed people, but you brought it back. You and Ivy. You brought me back." His hand reached out, hesitant, and touched her cheek. His palm was rough and warm. "I do not have much to offer," he said. "But I have this mountain. I have this cabin. I have 2 strong hands and a will to work. And I have a heart that I thought was dead. It is not dead. It is just scared." Nola felt tears on her face. "I do not know how to do this." "Neither do I," he said. "But I want to try." She covered his hand with hers, pressing it against her cheek. "Thatcher told me you were a good man," she said. "He told me you would help. But he did not tell me I would fall in love with you." Arden's eyes widened. I love you," Nola said. "I do not know when it happened. Maybe it was when you fed Ivy that first night. Maybe it was when you built her a cradle. Maybe it was when you smiled at her and I saw who you really were beneath all that fear. But I love you. And if you want us to stay, we will stay." He pulled her to him then, wrapping his arms around her and burying his face in her hair. She felt his shoulders shake, felt the dampness of tears against her neck. She held him and let him break, because he had been holding himself together for too long. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were red but clear. "I will build you a better cabin," he said. "Bigger, with a real bedroom and a loft for when Ivy grows. I will clear more land and plant a garden. I will make this a home, not just a shelter." "It is already a home," Nola said, "because you are in it." He kissed her then, gentle and careful, as if she were something precious he was afraid to break. She kissed him back, and felt the last of her fear dissolve. Ivy chose that moment to wake with a cry. They broke apart, laughing, and Arden went to pick her up. He held her in the crook of his arm and looked at Nola with an expression that was pure wonder. "We are a family," he said, as if testing the words. "Yes," Nola said. "We are." The winter passed. Arden began to talk more, his voice losing its rough edge. He told Nola about the mountain, about the animals and the seasons, about the places he wanted to show her when the weather turned. He played with Ivy, making her laugh with silly faces and gentle tickles. He sang to her in a low, rumbling voice that made the baby's eyes go wide with delight. Nola learned that beneath the silence and the solitude, Arden was a man of deep feeling and quiet joy. He noticed everything, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the way she hummed while she worked, the way she watched him when she thought he was not looking. And he responded in kind, leaving her small gifts: a smooth stone from the creek, a feather from a hawk, a handful of wildflowers that had bloomed impossibly early in a sheltered spot. They talked about Thatcher. Arden told her stories about their childhood, about the brother who had been brave and reckless and kind. Nola told him about the man Thatcher had become, about the husband who had loved her with his whole heart. They mourned him together, and in mourning, they healed. When spring finally came, the snow melted and the passes cleared. Arden did not mention leaving, neither did Nola. Instead, he began to build. He felled trees and split logs, laying the foundation for the new cabin he had promised. Nola helped where she could, holding boards and fetching tools, Ivy strapped to her back in a sling Arden had fashioned from soft leather. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the old cabin watching the sun set over the mountains, Arden took Nola's hand. "Will you marry me?" he asked. It was not a grand proposal. There were no flowers, no pretty words, just a man and a woman and a mountain and a question. "Yes," Nola said. They were married a month later by a circuit preacher who came through the valley. The ceremony was simple, held in the clearing in front of the half-built cabin. There were no guests except the sheep and the birds and Ivy, who babbled happily through the vows. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Arden kissed Nola with the mountain as their witness. And when they pulled apart, he picked up Ivy and held her between them, the 3 of them standing together in the fading light. "This is my family," Arden said, and his voice was strong and sure. Nola looked at him, at this man who had been alone for so long, who had thought he would never need anyone again. She looked at Ivy, who was reaching for Arden's beard with sticky fingers. She looked at the mountain rising behind them, vast and wild and beautiful. "This is home," she said. And it was.